I never imagined that a single dinner could unravel years of secrets, humiliation, and buried financial sacrifice, but that night changed everything. If someone had told me months earlier that my own child would be the one to expose the truth my husband spent 2 years hiding, I would never have believed them. Yet there we were, sitting around Margaret Collins's polished mahogany dining table, facing a storm that had been brewing long before the food even hit the plates. My husband's family called me a leech, I say as the video opens, my voice steady but filled with the weight of what happened. They said I didn't contribute, that I was draining him, that he deserved better than someone like me. For a moment, I let the silence linger before I continue. But they didn't know my son, my quiet, honest 8-year-old Ethan, was about to expose the truth. They didn't know he was about to reveal that I lent Jason $40,000. Money I got from selling my late grandfather's house. I introduce myself, Avery Collins, 34, a full-time remote billing coordinator, wife and mother. I was raised by my grandfather, Henry Carter, after my parents passed, and he left me his little home in Willow Creek when he died. I always thought that house would be something I passed down to my son. Instead, I sold it 2 years ago to help my husband during what he called a temporary crisis. Then I introduced the rest of the core characters. Jason Collins, my husband, 37, smart, charismatic, and always chasing the next big business idea. He loves me and our son, but he cares far too much about appearances, especially in front of his family. Ethan, our 8-year-old son, sensitive, observant, and fiercely honest. He's the kind of child who remembers everything you say because he takes words seriously. Margaret Collins, Jason's mother, 62 and ruling the family dynamics with an iron fist wrapped in pearls. She has never liked me, never approved of me, and never hesitated to say so. Dale, Jason's father, quieter, more reserved, but loyal to his wife's opinions. Lydia, Jason's older sister, who inherited Margaret's sharp tongue and talent for criticism. This dinner wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was meant to be a casual family meal, a catch-up, as Margaret put it. But from the moment we arrived, tension clung to the air like humidity. Margaret eyed my dress, a simple cream sweater and dark jeans, with silent judgment. Lydia smirked as if she already knew I'd be the night's entertainment. And then, like she was tossing out a casual observation, Margaret began with, "Some women contribute, some just live off their husbands." She didn't look at me when she said it, but every person at the table knew exactly who her words were meant for. Before I could respond, Ethan looked at me, confused. "Mom, why is Grandma saying that?" I shook my head lightly, hoping to avoid a scene. But Margaret continued, "I just think fairness matters. Jason works hard. Not everyone holds up their end." Jason sat there, silent. This was the exact moment my son straightened his little back in his chair, looked from his father to his grandmother, and said with innocent sincerity, "Dad, should I tell Grandma how much money Mom lent you last year? The $40,000? The entire table froze. I remember Jason's face paling instantly. He hissed, "Ethan, not now." But Ethan pressed on. "But you said telling the truth is always good." His voice was soft but clear. And there it was. The moment that broke open everything. The moment that ripped away 2 years of silence, secrecy, and humiliation I had silently swallowed. The moment my son decided he wasn't going to let me be called a leech, not when he knew the truth. That is where our story begins. Before that dinner ever happened, life in our home had been anything but simple. To understand the weight of that night, the viewers need to understand what came before. The slow drip of sacrifice, pressure, and quiet hope that eventually collapsed under the weight of one family dinner. I grew up with very little. My grandfather, Henry Carter, raised me alone after my parents passed away unexpectedly when I was 8. He was a simple man, worked in maintenance at a local plant, collected old coins, loved country music, and wore the same faded denim jacket year-round. When he died, he left me his pride and joy, a 2-bedroom house in Willow Creek. It wasn't much, but it was the only place that ever felt like home. When Jason and I married, I assumed we would keep the house forever, maybe renovate it someday. Maybe let Ethan live there when he grew up or rent it out. I never imagined I'd sell it. Not until Jason came home one night with panic etched across his face. "I messed up," he'd said. I remember him standing by the kitchen counter, his hands shaking slightly, his business folder open beside him. "Avery, the manufacturing partnership fell through. If I don't cover these costs, I could lose everything." I wanted to help. I loved him. So when he told me he needed money, $40,000, to bridge the gap until his next investment came through, I felt my chest tighten. That number wasn't small. It wasn't something we had lying around. He didn't ask me to sell the house. He suggested taking out a loan or approaching his parents, but I knew his family would weaponize the information forever. I knew they'd call him irresponsible, or worse, blame me for being a financial burden. So I offered the one thing I shouldn't have. "I can sell Grandpa Henry's house," I said quietly. Jason shook his head. "No, Avery, I can't ask you to do that. It's your family home." "You didn't ask," I said. "I'm offering." He promised, insisted, that he would pay me back within 6 months. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I will protect you the way you're protecting me." And I believed him. Selling the house broke something inside me. I cried quietly the day we signed the papers. I walked through each empty room, touching the walls, remembering the nights I traced those same corners as a frightened child missing my parents. I touched the kitchen counter where Grandpa taught me to knead dough for biscuits. I stood in the tiny living room where we decorated the tree every Christmas. But I sold it, because I believed we were a team. I never told Jason's family what I'd done. His mother, Margaret, had always assumed I was beneath her son. She viewed me as a responsibility rather than a partner. If she had known about the house sale, she wouldn't have thanked me. She would have criticized Jason for needing my help and criticized me for giving it, and so I carried the secret alone. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Jason's business recovered. His confidence returned. His family praised him endlessly, always adding a subtle jab about how he carried the household. And Jason let them. He let them believe it. He let them insult me. He let them assume I contributed nothing, and I, out of loyalty, stayed silent. But my son, Ethan, saw more than I realized. He noticed my stress. He knew something was different when we stopped visiting Grandpa Henry's house. One day, sitting at our kitchen table, he asked, "Mom, why did we stop going there?" I told him the truth gently, showing him the documents because he asked to see them. I didn't expect him to remember. I didn't expect him to understand. He was only 8, but he did. Oh, he understood. And when the night came that his grandmother called me a leech, that understanding became his courage. The dinner began normally, at least on the surface. Margaret greeted us with a forced smile, the kind where her lips stretched without her eyes following. Dale hovered behind her, trudging along like a man marching into yet another evening of tension he pretended not to notice. We stepped inside their spotless, museum-like home. Neutral tones, perfectly aligned picture frames, glass vases no one was allowed to touch. Every inch of it screamed control, order, and silent expectations. Ethan walked beside me, holding my hand tighter than usual. He always sensed the tension here. He never liked being around this side of the family because they rarely spoke to him unless it was to correct him. We sat at the table. Lydia arrived last, taking her place beside her mother like an understudy prepared to mirror her every comment. The appetizers were barely on the table when Margaret started poking at me. "How's work, Avery? Still doing that computer thing from home?" "Billing coordination," I corrected politely. "Yes." She sniffed. "Must be nice. Jason works a real job. The pressure he carries would crush some people." Jason looked down at his plate. I felt a small sting, but I swallowed it. I always did. Arguing with Margaret was like trying to argue with a wall that had already decided you were wrong. As dinner continued, Margaret took things further. "I was telling Lydia earlier," she began, "some women contribute a lot to their family. Some women support their husbands fully. Others—" She paused for dramatic effect. "Others simply take." The word hung there, sharp as a thorn. Ethan looked at her, then at me, then back at her. His eyebrows furrowed. "Are you talking about my mom?" he asked, innocence wrapped in confusion. Margaret didn't even hesitate. "Ethan, adults are talking." I felt my face heat. Jason muttered, "Mom, can we just not—" But she cut him off. No, Jason, I'm tired of pretending everything is equal. We all see how much you carry. Some partners lift the load, some add to it. Lydia nodded in agreement. Honestly, Avery, what do you bring financially? Jason pays for everything. My heart dropped. Jason didn't defend me. Not even a word. He stayed silent, letting them think I contributed nothing, letting them insult me openly, letting them humiliate me. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur slightly around the edges. The same humiliation I'd felt for 2 years, the sense of invisibility, of being undervalued, of carrying a secret weight no one saw, rose inside me like bile. Ethan tugged my sleeve. "Mom, why is Grandma saying that? You help Dad, I know you do." Margaret overheard. "She's teaching him excuses at his age already. Lovely." I snapped my head toward her. "Excuse me?" My voice shook, not with fear, but with anger. She lifted her chin. "If you want to contribute, Avery, then do it. Don't cling to my son like he's your financial lifeline." Jason whispered, "Mom, stop." But the damage was already done. I felt myself shrinking, curling inward, that familiar feeling of being small, unheard, unimportant in their eyes. I saw Ethan watching me, his little face tightening, his grip on my arm firm but trembling. And then something changed. He straightened in his chair. He inhaled deeply. He looked at his father, then at me, then back at Margaret, and with a voice that was steady, clear, and entirely unprepared by anyone at that table, he said the words that set everything in motion. "Dad," Ethan said, "should I tell Grandma how much money Mom lent you last year?" The fork in Lydia's hand froze mid-air. "Like the 40,000, he added. The conflict had finally exploded. Silence fell across the room so fast and so hard that I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan above us. Jason's face went white, his eyes widening with a mix of panic and disbelief. Margaret blinked, confused but alert, like a predator that had just heard movement in the bushes. "Ethan." Jason's voice was a sharp whisper. "Not now." Ethan looked genuinely confused. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He wasn't trying to embarrass his dad. He was simply answering the question everyone kept circling around. "What do I contribute?" "But you always say telling the truth is important," he said, eyebrows knitting together. "And Grandma keeps saying Mom doesn't help. She helped a lot." Margaret leaned forward slowly, her expression morphing from irritation to something close to suspicion. "What money is he talking about?" she asked Jason directly. Jason swallowed hard. "Mom, it's nothing we need to discuss right now." Ethan frowned. "But Dad, you said it was okay to tell the truth." I gently touched Ethan's arm. "Sweetheart." But he wasn't done. "When I asked Mom why we weren't going to Grandpa Henry's house anymore," he explained, "she showed me the papers, the ones from when she sold it." Margaret's face tightened. "You sold your grandfather's house?" I inhaled shakily, trying to navigate this moment without falling apart. Yes, it was something I felt was necessary at the time. "For what?" Margaret pressed. And then Ethan delivered the turning point, the line that shattered every lie, every misconception, every silent humiliation I had endured. "To help Dad," Ethan said plainly, "to give him the $40,000 for his work problem." Jason shot up from his seat. "Ethan!" His voice cracked with desperation. Ethan flinched but stayed firm. "You said you'd pay Mom back in 6 months. It's been 2 years." Lydia gasped dramatically. Dale choked slightly on his drink. Even the air seemed to freeze. Jason tried to regain control. "This is not the time." "When is the time, Jason?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling. "When your family finishes tearing me down completely?" Margaret looked back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match she couldn't follow. "Jason," she demanded, "is this true?" Jason didn't answer. He couldn't. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. The turning point wasn't just Ethan speaking up. It was the moment I finally saw the truth with absolute clarity. Jason would have let his family humiliate me forever if it meant protecting his pride. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. Not uncontrolled, screaming anger, but a steady, calm, grounded anger. The kind that comes from realizing you have been carrying a burden alone that never should have been yours. I looked at Ethan, who who had tears forming in his eyes. "I didn't want them to be mean to you," he whispered. My heart squeezed. "I know, baby. Thank you." That moment changed everything. It wasn't just a child speaking up. It was the truth crashing through a wall built out of shame, silence, and fear. The dinner wasn't salvageable. The relationships in that room weren't salvageable, not as they were. But the truth was out, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: strength. Calm-Alive. The climax. 700 words. If the turning point cracked the room open, the climax shattered it completely. Margaret stared at Jason with disbelief. "You borrowed $40,000 from your wife?" she asked, her voice thin and icy, as if each word weighed 10 pounds. Jason clenched his jaw. "I didn't borrow it, she offered." "To fix a problem you created," Lydia snapped. Jason's eyes darted between them. "It wasn't like that. It was a business emergency. I didn't want to involve anyone else." "So you involved your wife," Margaret said sharply, "and then let us think she contributed nothing to this family?" Her voice wasn't soft. It wasn't apologetic. It was furious. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan beat him to it again. "Dad said he'd pay Mom back in 6 months," he said quietly, but he didn't. The innocence in his tone made the truth hit even harder. Jason slammed his hand on the table. "Ethan, enough!" Ethan jumped, startled, his eyes filling instantly with tears. My chair scraped loudly as I stood up. "You do not raise your voice at him," I snapped, feeling something fierce and protective take over. "He told the truth, something you should have done a long time ago." Jason pointed at me, his voice low. "I didn't lie." "You didn't correct them," I said. "You let them think I contributed nothing when you know that without my grandfather's house, you would have lost your business." Lydia scoffed. "So you bailed him out?" I turned to her with a calm I didn't know I had. Yes, I did, because I believed in him, because I thought marriage meant supporting each other, even when it's hard. Margaret looked at Jason like she didn't recognize him. "Did you even thank her?" Jason looked down. That told everyone everything. I took a deep breath and said clearly, "I'm done being humiliated. I'm done letting you sit silently while your family tears me apart. I'm done being made into the problem when I was the solution." Ethan sniffled beside me, and I rested a hand on his shoulder. Margaret slowly sat back in her chair, her expression shifting. "Avery," she said, hesitating for the first time I had ever heard, "I didn't know." "For 2 years," I said softly, "because he let you believe a lie." Jason looked up at me, guilt drowning his face. "I didn't want them to think I needed your help." "And look how well you protected your pride," I replied. "You let them label me a burden, a leech, a taker, while I carried your secret." No one spoke, not Lydia, not Dale, not even Margaret, who had never once hesitated to fill silence. It was the quietest their house had ever been. Finally, I gathered my purse. "We're leaving." Jason stood quickly. "Avery, wait." "No," I said sharply. "You don't get to silence me anymore." Ethan stood and slipped his small hand into mine. "Are you mad at me?" he asked. I knelt in front of him. "Mad at you? No, you told the truth, and you stood up for me when no one else did." He wrapped his arms around my neck, and I held him tightly. When I stood again, Margaret said softly, "Avery, I'm sorry." I nodded once, not fully accepting, not rejecting, just acknowledging. Jason followed us outside, his face crumpled. "I'll fix this," he said desperately. "You should have fixed it 2 years ago," I replied. And with that, I walked away, not quietly, not apologetically, but with the dignity I had been denied for far too long. The car ride home that night was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence that follows an argument. It was a reflective silence, the kind filled with unspoken realizations and shifting dynamics. Ethan sat in the back, his legs swinging gently, clutching his small, stuffed dinosaur. I could tell he was processing everything, unsure if he had done something wrong or right. When we got home, I tucked him into bed. He looked up at me with those wide, earnest eyes and whispered, "I didn't want them to say mean things about you." I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said softly. "You stood up for me. That means more than you know." "But Dad got mad," he said. "He wasn't mad at you," I reassured him. "He was scared. Sometimes adults get scared when the truth comes out." "Like when you sold Grandpa Henry's house?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes, that was a hard truth, too." He snuggled into his pillow. "I just wanted them to know you help us." Tears pricked behind my eyes. "You're a good boy, Ethan." After he fell asleep, I went to the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the dark window. A few minutes later, Jason walked in quietly. He looked exhausted, emotionally drained, ashamed, and anxious. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Avery," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry." I didn't speak immediately. I let him feel the weight of the silence he had given me for 2 years. "I should have told them," he continued. "I should have defended you. I should have paid you back." "You should have respected me," I said gently, "not just as your wife, as a partner." He rubbed his face. I was embarrassed. I didn't want my family to think I was irresponsible. "And so you let them think I was useless," I replied. "You traded my dignity for your pride." He winced. "I know, and I'm ashamed of it." For the first time since the dinner, I softened slightly, not for his sake, but for my own. The anger had served its purpose, but now I needed clarity. "I'm setting boundaries," I said plainly. "If your family ever speaks to me like that again and you stay silent, I'm done. I won't stay in a marriage where I'm the punching bag for your insecurities." Jason nodded slowly. "I understand." "And you'll repay the money," I added, "not for the amount, for the principle." "Yes," he said immediately. "I will." Over the next few days, things shifted. Margaret called, not with excuses, but with a genuine apology. "I judged you unfairly," she said. "I didn't know the truth." "I know," I replied, "but the damage was real." She promised to treat me differently. Whether I believed her was something time would determine, not her words. Jason worked on fixing himself, really fixing himself. Not grand gestures, but small accountability moments. He talked to Ethan, apologized to him too. He scheduled meetings with his accountant to set up repayment. He defended me to his family without me prompting him. It wasn't perfect. Nothing changes overnight. But it was the beginning of something healthier. And me? I grew. I learned that silence is not kindness when it costs your self-worth. I learned that secrets meant to protect someone else can become chains around your own throat. And I learned that sometimes the bravest truth teller in the room is the smallest one. Ethan gave me back my voice that night. The least I can do now is never lose it again. As I look back on that night, I realize something important. Sometimes the truth comes out in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it's spoken by the person you least expect. And sometimes it's the voice of a child, a voice untouched by pride, ego, or fear, that forces adults to finally face what they've been avoiding. Ethan didn't expose the truth to hurt anyone. He did it because he saw his mom being torn down and couldn't understand why the truth was being buried to protect the wrong person. And honestly, that's the part that stays with me the most. His courage reminded me that silence doesn't make us strong. Boundaries do. Speaking up does. Protecting your dignity does. If there's anything I want other women to take from this story, it's that your contributions matter, whether people see them or not. And the people who love you, truly love you, will stand up for you the way my son stood up for me. That kind of love is rare, pure, and worth protecting. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through the uncomfortable moments, the heartbreak, and the healing. Your support means more than you know. If this story touched you or made you think of someone who needs to hear it, please take a moment to like the video, share it, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional, real-life storytelling. Every interaction helps keep these stories alive and helps them reach people who need them. Thank you again for being here. I'll see you in the next story.